Today we'll be discussing Michel Foucault's work called Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. The motive we got here with Discipline and Punish is that Foucault wants to give a logical narrative for the history and for the practices of punishing crime in the late 1700s through the mid 1800s. He also wants to give us a reason as to why the attitudes towards crime had changed. Now you see, the reason why Foucault talks about crime, or maybe it's better to say the reason why he wants to talk about discipline and punishment, is that it also gives him a very good chance to also explain how power operates in our society and how people are pushed into these so-called correct behaviors. So what we're going to do with the help of Foucault is that we're going to analyze punishment in its social context too. The first two parts of Discipline and Punish shows us how there was a transition from public display of punishments to private detention. In better words, Foucault wants to show us the reason for the change of punishing criminals in public and how it came to become something private. He claims that up until the 1700s, punishments for crimes were given out by kings or leaders of the country, and usually these punishments were in the form of public executions or torture. They did these things to obviously re-establish power and authority within the society. Slowly and gradually in the 1800s, at the beginning of the 1800s to be more precise, there was this transition taking place. These public punishments were replaced with a different method. And the reason for the change of method wasn't because people cared for these criminals, but because the people who wanted to change the method of punishment, they wanted power to run more efficiently. This is what gave rise to the birth of the prison. Now, criminals were being taken away from social view and torture was pretty much out of the picture. Now the focus was not to execute or punish the person, but it was to change the person, to reform the person's personality so that crime could be prevented later. This shift from torture to prisons also brought about many other changes. Firstly, there is a change from focusing on the body to focusing on the soul. And when we talk about the soul, we are talking about the self, the mind, the immaterial aspects of a human being. Secondly, there is a change in perspective, because now we don't think of crime as an injury but as a violation of social norms. We now think like this: that the criminal has violated the social codes, that the criminal went against society, and that the criminal must now be reformed because that criminal has to fit back into society. Also, we think, we should not break these social norms either. There is this control in society now. There's this hidden guideline as to how we should act and how we should not act. We live with this deeply rooted understanding that if we break the norms, we could be punished. Now, going back to talking about these criminals, well, it is the norm now that they need to be disciplined, and discipline is a technique in which power can be exercised. Discipline is the manipulation of the individual's movements, and it is the manipulation of their sense of space and time. Such discipline, for example, is exercised through timetables or military drills, and this is known as discipline power, and it's based on three principles. Well, the first principle is hierarchical observation, and hierarchical observation is an all-knowing presence of power that constantly observes everything with all knowledge circling back to its center. In return, we have a constant way of controlling people. So let's say that you're a soldier in training and you're in a room, in a corridor, and these rooms, they have windows, very big windows where we can see your head and feet, and you are being inspected. Not all the time, but because of the window, you feel that you are being inspected and could be inspected at any time. This is hierarchical observation. You feel the presence of a power that is constantly observing everything, a power above you. The second principle is normalizing judgment. It consists of very subtle and consistent ways of discipline. And these methods could include some form of physical punishment, deprivations, and humiliations, for example. This sort of power makes us feel that if we deviate from these so-called norms, these subjective social norms, then it could result in us getting punished. And then the last one is the examination, which is a combination of the first two principles. Those in power observe, judge, and punish those who are not in power. It's the normalizing gaze, where people fear being judged, observed, and punished. And you can see such power everywhere. You will find all three principles working pretty much everywhere. Then in the third part of discipline and punish, we start analyzing different institutions which act like prisons too. In the 1800s, many institutions were reinvented. They were reinvented with an aim in mind, and that aim was to reform people, to train people so that they could correct or develop these certain behaviors. These institutions confined people, it gave them a place, a role, and the members of these institutions were constantly being analyzed and observed, and being analyzed and observed also worked fantastically well into making these members of these institutions start acting in the ways that they should. And you can see this take place in many ways. For example, a school is a fantastic example of this, because schools train students by giving everyone a grade and a place in the classroom. Moving on, let's talk about the Panopticon, because it became a very important symbol in the process of this whole shift. Now you might be thinking, what is this Panopticon? Well, the Panopticon is a concept of discipline that is brought to life in the form of a central observation tower placed within a circle of prison cells. So what you had was, you had a tall central tower, and then you had the prison cells arranged around this central tower. Because of the way it was built, it made the prisoners feel that they could be watched at any time. So the prisoners would never disobey, they wouldn't go astray, they wouldn't try anything funny because they had a fear of being caught. What Foucault does is that he takes this Panopticon as a symbol of social organization on a huge scale. Foucault says that this is how people live in Western societies now. In Western society, people observe themselves through social norms and they adapt themselves according to them. This power, which is about discipline, is everywhere, because social norms don't belong to any individual like they used to belong to the kings in the previous period that we had talked about earlier on. And then in the fourth part, Foucault talks about how prisons haven't really done much. They have not done what they were intended to do, because criminals still commit crimes and they get released without being reformed too. However, prisons still exist, not because it works or anything, but because of the symbolic power it has in organizing a society. One example of how it organizes a society is that it gives people's classes. So we have different classes. Now we have the offenders, the murderers, the thieves, and so on and so forth. And these classes are separated from the rest of society. Alright, I think we can wind it up here. I think I've talked about the key ideas, and I hope I have helped you out and given you food for thought. If you like to hear more things like this, then be sure to subscribe, and thank you for listening.